The little black girl warned the biker that someone pulled a child into a staff-only room during the charity gala. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's dramatic story. It was a night filled with laughter, lights, and excitement. The charity gala was in full swing, with guests dressed to the nines, sipping champagne, and engaging in lively conversations. The air was thick with the sound of clinking glasses and soft music playing in the background. People wandered from table to table, exchanging business cards, and trying to network with the right people. The ballroom sparkled under the grand chandeliers, and for most, it was the highlight of the year. But for one little girl, this night was about to take a terrifying turn. Maya, a young black girl, no older than 9, had been enjoying the event with her mother, who worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Maya, innocent and unaware of the danger lurking around her, was trying to blend in with the crowd of fancy guests. She had always been shy, but her mother assured her that tonight would be fun. As the night wore on, Maya's curiosity led her to the staff-only areas. She had been told countless times to avoid these places, but tonight, something felt different. The hustle of the gala continued on, and Maya, wandering a bit too far from her mother, found herself near a hallway that led to the staff rooms. She didn't know what drew her in, but her feet carried her down the dimly lit corridor, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. But as she approached the door to the staff-only room, she saw something that made her stomach drop. A man, tall and intimidating, was standing in the hallway, speaking quietly to a child who appeared no older than Maya. The door to the staff-only room was cracked open, and Maya could hear muffled voices. She knew immediately that something wasn't right. The man's voice was calm, but there was an unsettling tone in his words, a coldness that sent a shiver down her spine. Maya's heart raced, her legs frozen in place. She didn't know what to do, but she couldn't ignore the fear rising in her chest. She needed help. Without thinking, Maya turned and sprinted back toward the main ballroom, her small hands trembling. As she burst through the door, she collided with a figure she barely recognized at first, but then she saw the familiar face of a biker standing at the edge of the room. His name was Jack, known in the biker community as the Hammer, and he was just one of the many who had been attending the charity gala that night. He was built like a wall of muscle, with a presence that commanded attention. But unlike the rest, Jack was not just here for the party. He had a reputation for looking out for those who needed protection, especially when it came to children. Maya's heart pounded as she approached him, the words escaping her in a panic. "Please, someone's got my brother in that room," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Jack's eyes narrowed as he listened, his instincts kicking in. He wasn't sure who the man was or what was going on, but there was no question in his mind about what needed to be done. He knew what had to happen next. "Stay here," Jack said firmly, his voice low and calm. He gave Maya a quick nod before turning to his group of friends, who were scattered throughout the venue. They didn't hesitate, recognizing the urgency in his tone. They were always ready to act when needed. Together, they quickly formed a plan. Jack and the group moved swiftly through the crowd, their eyes scanning for any sign of the man or the child. They knew the stakes were high, and the risk of getting caught up in a situation like this wasn't something they took lightly. But they also knew they couldn't just stand by. As they approached the staff area, the tension in the air was palpable. They had to be careful. Rushing in recklessly could escalate things further. But Jack wasn't about to back down. This wasn't just about protecting a child. It was about ensuring that no one was above the law, not even the people hiding behind their fancy attire at a charity gala. The group stood ready, their eyes focused and their nerves steeled for whatever came next. They knew that what they were about to do might have consequences, but they also knew one thing for sure. They weren't going to let that child be hurt. The bikers moved quickly, their steps steady and purposeful as they made their way toward the staff-only hallway. Jack, still focused, led the group, his eyes scanning the crowd, making sure that they were not drawing attention to themselves. They were used to moving quickly in tight situations, but this was different. This wasn't a usual scuffle in the streets or a dispute at a bar. This was about a child, someone's son or daughter, and that meant it was personal. As they approached the hallway leading to the staff-only rooms, Jack could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The atmosphere around them shifted, from the excitement and elegance of the gala to something much darker, much more dangerous. Every corner they turned felt like it was pulling them deeper into the unknown. Jack glanced over his shoulder to make sure the rest of the group was keeping up. The sounds of the gala were now a distant hum, replaced by the steady beat of their own heartbeats, the quick rhythm of anticipation. His eyes met with those of his crew. Diesel, Bear, Shadow, Colossus, and the others. All hardened men, all trained to act in moments of danger, yet each of them knew this was more than just a rescue mission. This was about doing the right thing. They reached the door of the staff room, which was slightly ajar. Jack motioned for everyone to stop. He placed his hand gently on the door, feeling the cold metal under his fingers. He could hear voices from inside, low and indistinct, but one thing was clear. Someone was in there, and it wasn't going to be an easy fight. Stay sharp, Jack whispered to his team. Diesel, the big guy, nodded grimly, his hand hovering near his sidearm. They all knew the risks. The door creaked as Jack slowly pushed it open. The dim light from the hallway barely illuminated the room, casting shadows across the walls. It was a small, cluttered space, nothing too special about it. But then Jack saw the child. He was sitting in the corner, wide-eyed, trembling with fear. His face was pale, and there were signs of distress. His clothes were disheveled, and his hands were tightly gripping his knees. Standing over him was a tall man in a suit. The man was talking to the child in a calm, almost too calm voice, trying to coax him into saying something. Jack's eyes narrowed. This wasn't right. The man was too smooth, too confident for someone who was supposedly just helping. Jack didn't hesitate. Hey, he called out, his voice cutting through the silence of the room. The man turned sharply, his eyes wide with shock. What the hell do you think you're doing? Jack's voice was steady, but it carried the weight of authority, a warning that this wasn't a game. The man didn't speak at first. His eyes flicked over to the child, then back to Jack, calculating his next move. But Jack wasn't waiting for him to make a decision. Step away from the kid now, Jack demanded. His team moved into the room behind him, flanking the man on all sides. The tension was thick. The man stood frozen for a moment, his eyes darting from Jack to the door, looking for an escape. But he was cornered. You're making a huge mistake, the man finally said, his voice betraying a hint of panic. Jack didn't flinch. No, you are. Now, get away from him, he repeated, his voice even, but firm. Diesel stepped forward, his imposing presence adding to the intimidation. The man, now realizing that he was outnumbered and outmatched, took a slow step back. His hand went to his pocket, but before he could pull out anything, Jack was already there. With one swift motion, Jack grabbed the man's wrist and twisted it behind his back, pushing him to the ground. The man fell to his knees with a grunt of pain. Stay down, Jack warned, his voice low and controlled. The rest of the team surrounded the child, checking him over. Shadow knelt down beside him, offering a gentle hand. You okay, kid? He asked softly. The child nodded, his eyes still wide with fear, but he was no longer trembling as much. Jack looked at the man on the floor, his face a mixture of anger and frustration. Who the hell are you? He demanded, his grip tightening. The man didn't respond right away, but then he let out a low sigh. I'm not a criminal. I was just trying to help him, he said, his voice breaking. Jack wasn't buying it. What's your connection to this child? He asked. The man's eyes flicked toward the door again, and Jack knew that the situation was far from over. He's not yours to help. You're taking him with you, Jack said, his tone final. He didn't wait for a response. Instead, he turned to his crew, signaling for them to make sure the kid was safe. The man tried to protest again, but his words were cut off as Diesel moved in to cuff him. The biker turned to Jack. What now? Diesel asked. Jack didn't hesitate. We call the cops. This isn't over yet, he said firmly. The team moved quickly, securing the man and ensuring the child was safely escorted out of the room. As they walked out, Jack glanced back over his shoulder, knowing that this was just the beginning. The gala might have resumed its usual buzz, but something had changed. The night would never be the same. The sirens wailed in the distance, and Jack could hear the faint hum of police cars racing toward the gala. The night had already taken a dark turn, and now it seemed like the situation was about to explode. The man they had restrained on the ground in the staff-only room was now cuffed and sitting against the wall, his face pale and his eyes shifting nervously. Jack stood over him, his arms crossed, glaring down with a mix of suspicion and disdain. The rest of the bikers stood by, forming a protective circle around the child, Maya, who was now sitting with Shadow. The little girl was still shaken but now safe, her trembling slowly subsiding as Shadow gently spoke to her. Jack knew they had to act fast, and as the police neared, he could feel the weight of the promise he'd made to Maya's father all those years ago. He wouldn't let the kid suffer, not while he could do something about it. Jack turned to Diesel, his second in command. "You know what to do?" Jack said, his voice low but firm. Diesel nodded. "Got it," he said, before turning to the others. They needed to move quickly, and with the police on their way, time was running out. Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had promised Maya's father that he'd protect her, and damn it, he was going to keep that promise. He glanced over at Maya again, her big brown eyes looking up at him with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Jack knew that she still didn't fully understand the gravity of what had happened, but she would soon. They all would. The police arrived with a screeching halt, their cars lining up in front of the Gala entrance. Officers spilled out of the vehicles, their boots hitting the ground in quick succession. The tension in the air was almost palpable. The bikers didn't move. Jack and Diesel exchanged a brief look before walking toward the front doors of the Gala, their footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The police officer in charge, a tall man with short-cropped hair, approached them. His eyes locked onto Jack's with a steely gaze. "What's going on here?" the officer demanded, his tone sharp. Jack didn't flinch. "We've got a kidnapper on our hands," Jack said calmly, pointing toward the staff-only room. "That man there tried to take a kid. We stopped him." The officer's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting to the man who was still sitting on the floor, visibly shaken. "You're saying this man tried to kidnap a child?" the officer asked. Jack nodded. "That's exactly what I'm saying." The officer took a step closer to the restrained man, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "And who are you?" the officer asked Jack. "What's your role in all of this?" Jack didn't hesitate. "I'm the one who kept the kid from being taken. I'm the one who made sure she's safe." The officer glanced over his shoulder at his team, then back at Jack. "And you're he trailed off, clearly unsure how to categorize the biker standing in front of him. "I'm a man who protects kids," Jack said, his voice unwavering. "Now, if you want to keep wasting time on this guy, go ahead. But I'm telling you, you've got a real case here." A child was almost taken in plain sight. The officer was silent for a moment, clearly weighing his options. Jack could see the tension in his posture, the indecision. The officer finally spoke, his voice a little softer now. "All right, let's see what we've got here." He motioned for his team to move in, and the officers began to search the man, looking for any evidence of wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Jack returned to Maya and the rest of the bikers. Diesel was standing guard, watching the officers closely. Jack knelt down next to Maya, his hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" he asked softly. Maya nodded slowly. "I was scared," she whispered, her voice small and fragile. Jack gave her a reassuring smile. "You did the right thing. You're safe now, okay?" Maya smiled weakly, but Jack could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. Jack stood up and turned to face the officers. One of them, a young woman, walked over to Jack with a folder in her hands. "We've got the suspect's ID. His name's Eric Mackenzie. He works for the event staff here, and we found some disturbing items in his bag," she said, her voice serious. "We're taking him in for questioning." Jack nodded. "Good. He's not walking away from this." As the officers led Mackenzie out of the building, Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from Forge, one of the other bikers. Asterisk, "Everything okay? You need backup." Asterisk, Jack read the message, then typed a quick reply. Asterisk, "We're good for now. Just waiting for the aftermath. Stay alert." Asterisk, Jack tucked his phone back into his jacket pocket and turned to face Maya once more. The police were already preparing to take their statements, and Jack knew they couldn't stay much longer. But before he left, he made sure to look at Maya one last time. "You're safe now," Jack said, his voice warm. "I promise you're safe." Maya's smile was small but genuine. She didn't say anything more, but Jack could see the gratitude in her eyes. As the bikers walked out of the Gala, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. They had stopped one dangerous man tonight, but something told him that this wouldn't be the last time he'd have to protect this little girl. The night had started with a simple promise, but Jack knew that some promises came with a price. The morning after the chaotic night at the charity gala, the sun had risen slowly over the city, casting long shadows across the streets. Jack sat in his bike shop, his hands resting on the worn surface of the workbench, the hum of the early morning traffic barely audible through the thick walls. The rest of the bikers had dispersed, each one heading back to their own lives after the events of the night before. But Jack wasn't ready to move on just yet. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that the man they had stopped last night, Eric McKenzie, wasn't the only one with dark intentions. The whole situation felt off. As the shop door opened with a loud jingle, Diesel walked in, his boots clicking on the concrete floor. "You good?" Diesel asked, his voice low, his expression unreadable. Jack didn't answer right away. He just looked out the window, his mind replaying the events of the previous night. The way Mackenzie had seemed so calm, so collected, even as he was restrained. There was something else going on, Jack was sure of it. "Something's wrong, Diesel," Jack muttered, finally turning to face his brother. Diesel raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing the shift in Jack's tone. "What do you mean?" "Mackenzie," Jack began, his voice tight. He wasn't working alone. "There's someone else pulling the strings. We got lucky last night, but we can't just let it go." Diesel leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. "You think he was just a pawn?" Jack nodded, his fingers tapping the side of his coffee mug. "He had too many connections. Too many people in high places. This isn't just some random act of violence. It's bigger than that." Diesel's face grew serious. "So what's the plan?" Jack's eyes narrowed. "We keep digging. I'm calling in some favors, see what we can find on Mackenzie. But I need to know where he was getting his orders from." Diesel nodded again, understanding the gravity of the situation. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "Not until we get to the bottom of it," Jack replied firmly. Just as Jack was about to grab his phone, the door to the shop opened again, and this time it was Maya, the little girl they had saved the night before, standing in the doorway. Her mother, Aisha, was with her, holding her hand protectively as she stepped into the shop. Maya's eyes were wide, her face still pale from the shock of the previous night, but she was standing tall, as if trying to show that she was okay. Aisha gave Jack a small smile, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Is it okay if we come in?" Aisha asked softly. Jack stood up immediately, his face softening. "Of course. Come in." He stepped aside to let them through. Maya walked in, her eyes scanning the room as if trying to make sense of everything. She was still processing what had happened, but there was a fire in her eyes, a spark of resilience. Jack crouched down to her level, giving her a kind smile. "Hey, you doing okay?" Maya nodded slowly. "I'm better now," she said quietly, though her voice still trembled. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're a brave girl. You know that, right?" Maya smiled shyly, looking up at him. "Thank you." Aisha stepped forward, looking at Jack with a serious expression. "I came to thank you. Both of you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there. I don't want to think about it." Jack nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "We just did what needed to be done," he said. Diesel, still standing off to the side, cleared his throat. "Is there anything we can do for you?" Aisha shook her head, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "We're just trying to move on. But I wanted to talk to you about something else." Jack stood up, his gaze fixed on her. "What's going on?" "It's Mackenzie," Aisha said, her voice dropping. "I found something out. My ex-husband. He was involved with Mackenzie's crew. They were trying to get my daughter." Jack's expression hardened. "Your ex?" "Yes," Aisha replied. "He was working with Mackenzie for months, maybe longer. I never knew, but when I found out, it made sense." Jack's mind raced. "Why didn't you say something before?" Aisha hesitated. "I didn't know who to trust. But now that I know it was Mackenzie behind it all, I'm scared." Jack's hand clenched into a fist. "We'll keep you safe. Don't worry about that. You're not alone in this." Diesel stepped forward. "We'll find out everything we can. No one's going to hurt you or your daughter." Aisha nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." Jack gave her a reassuring smile. "You're part of the family. Now, we take care of our own." As Aisha and Maya left the shop, Jack felt a weight settle on his chest. This was far from over. Mackenzie was just the beginning. He had to find out who else was involved and put a stop to it before it was too late. The promise he made to Maya's father, the promise to keep her safe, it wasn't just words. It was a vow, and Jack wasn't about to break it. The next few days were a blur of activity. Jack and his crew had been working tirelessly, tracking down leads, speaking to their sources, and piecing together the fragments of a much larger puzzle. Every move they made felt like stepping deeper into a web of deceit, and Jack was growing more convinced that the threat they had uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. The information Aisha had given them about her ex-husband and his involvement with Mackenzie sent a chill down Jack's spine. If he had known about it sooner, maybe they could have stopped this sooner. But now they were facing a much bigger enemy, one that operated in the shadows, pulling strings from behind the scenes. Jack stood in his bike shop, looking over a map of the city spread out on the workbench. Diesel was pacing back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear, his brows furrowed in concentration. "Yeah, I got it. We'll meet at midnight," Diesel said into the phone, then hung up. "We got a lead," Diesel said, turning to face Jack. "There's a warehouse on the east side of town. It's owned by one of Mackenzie's guys. Looks like they've been using it as a drop point for whatever it is they're moving." Jack nodded, his hand still resting on the map. He could feel the weight of the decision that was about to be made. This was their chance to get to the heart of this operation, but it was also dangerous. They were walking right into the lion's den. "Midnight, huh? Let's go," Jack said, his voice calm but determined. Diesel gave him a nod and grabbed his jacket, motioning for the rest of the crew to get ready. "Everyone's in position," Diesel said. "We're going in quiet, no mistakes." The plan was simple. Hit the warehouse, gather as much intel as possible, and get out without alerting anyone. But Jack knew that plans like these rarely went smoothly. By the time midnight rolled around, the crew had assembled outside the warehouse. It was a large, nondescript building, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a part of town where people didn't ask questions. The area was quiet, but Jack could feel the tension building. The bikes were parked out of sight, and the team moved quickly, covering their faces with bandanas and helmets. Jack took point, with Diesel and the others close behind. The warehouse doors were locked, but that wasn't a problem. Bear, the club's resident mechanic and all-around problem solver, quickly picked the lock, and the team was inside in moments. The air inside the warehouse was thick with dust and the smell of old oil. The space was cavernous, and there were stacks of boxes and crates scattered throughout. But what really caught Jack's attention was the group of men standing near the back of the warehouse, talking in hushed voices. Jack motioned for the crew to spread out, taking cover behind stacks of crates and equipment. They needed to hear what was going on without being seen. Jack could make out bits of conversation, something about a shipment coming in soon and a plan to move out of town. It didn't take a genius to figure out that this was more than just some underground deal. This was a full-fledged operation, and the stakes were much higher than Jack had imagined. "They're moving something big," Diesel whispered into Jack's earpiece. "We need to find out what it is." Jack nodded. "Keep your eyes open." They watched as one of the men walked toward a corner of the warehouse, unlocking a large metal door. Inside, there were several more crates stacked high, but this time, there were also bags. Large, heavy-looking bags that made Jack's stomach churn. "Drugs," he muttered to himself. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about a kidnapper or some petty criminal. They were dealing with something far more dangerous. As Jack moved in closer to get a better look, the sound of a door opening caught his attention. He turned quickly, signaling for everyone to hide. A group of men, carrying what looked like heavy-duty equipment, walked into the warehouse. They didn't seem to notice the bikers hiding in the shadows. Jack held his breath, waiting for them to pass. He could hear their voices as they spoke in low tones, talking about deliveries and plans to move the merchandise. Jack's heart raced. This was bigger than he thought. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but they were still missing something crucial. He had to know what was in those bags, and he had to do it fast. "We need to move," Jack whispered into the mic. "Get what you can, then get out." The crew moved quickly, snapping pictures of the bags, the crates, and any other evidence they could find. But as Jack turned to leave, something caught his eye. Near the back of the warehouse was a locked office, its door barely ajar. Jack felt a twinge of curiosity. Without thinking, he motioned for Diesel to follow him. They quietly approached the office and peered inside. The room was small, but there was a desk, a computer, and a file cabinet. Jack's instincts told him to search the place. He moved to the desk, carefully opening the drawer. Inside, he found several files, all marked with the name McKinsey Enterprises. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he flipped through the files. There were records of payments, names, and addresses that all led back to the same conclusion. McKinsey wasn't just a small-time operator. He was the leader of a criminal syndicate, and he had people in high places. Jack felt the weight of the discovery sink in. They had just uncovered something much larger than they'd imagined. This wasn't just about protecting one child. It was about stopping an entire criminal network before it destroyed even more lives. Jack stood up, his mind racing. "We need to go," he said, his voice tight with determination. Now, the crew gathered what they could, and as quietly as they had entered, they left the warehouse, the sound of their boots disappearing into the night. Jack knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger fight. But one thing was certain, he wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. The following morning, Jack sat at his usual spot in the bike shop, his hands still coated with the grease from the previous night's work. He glanced over the files they had found at the warehouse, his mind racing with the information they had uncovered. McKinsey Enterprises wasn't just another small-time operation. It was a massive network with ties to drug cartels, money laundering, and human trafficking. Every lead they had gathered pointed toward a much larger operation than he had anticipated. Jack rubbed his temples, trying to process it all. They had uncovered enough evidence to bring McKinsey and his entire syndicate down, but it was going to take time they didn't have. Diesel walked in, his expression serious as always, and handed Jack a fresh cup of coffee. "We've got a problem," Diesel said, his voice low. "A bigger one than we thought." Jack took the coffee, his eyes still on the files. "What now?" "McKinsey's got eyes everywhere," Diesel continued. "I ran some checks. He's got people in law enforcement, local politicians, you name it. And not just here, across state lines." Jack's eyes narrowed. "I thought we were dealing with a small-time operation. We're up against a whole damn network." Diesel nodded grimly. "Exactly. The feds are already sniffing around. If we don't make our move soon, McKinsey's going to slip through our fingers, and all this evidence we've gathered will be useless." Jack stood up, his jaw clenched. "We can't let that happen. We need to move on McKinsey now, before he has a chance to disappear." Diesel hesitated. "And what about Maya?" Jack paused, his mind shifting gears. He hadn't let go of the promise he'd made to Maya's father. He hadn't let go of the weight of protecting her from whatever threat McKinsey was still lurking behind. "Maya's safe for now," Jack said, his voice firm. "But we can't ignore the fact that she's still a target. McKinsey's not just going to walk away from this quietly." Diesel understood. "I'll get the crew together. We'll keep an eye on her, make sure she stays safe. But we need to move fast. McKinsey's going to know we're onto him soon enough." Jack nodded, determination settling into his bones. "Get the crew. We're going in." The plan was simple but risky. Jack and Diesel would lead the charge, hitting McKinsey's hideout before anyone had the chance to warn him. They knew McKinsey had a lot of muscle, but with the right timing, they could catch him off guard. By the time the sun began to set, Jack and Diesel were gearing up, preparing for the final confrontation. The rest of the crew was spread out, watching Maya, ensuring that McKinsey's men wouldn't make a move on her. The bikers had been silent during the preparation, their expressions grim as they readied themselves for what was to come. Jack pulled his leather jacket on, adjusting the patches on his back. His fingers brushed the worn fabric of the jacket, a reminder of everything he had promised, everything he had fought for. He was ready. They all were. As the crew assembled in the parking lot, Jack's phone buzzed. It was a text from Aisha. Maya's asking about her dad. I don't know what to tell her. Jack felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He hadn't promised Maya that her father would be there, but he had promised her that he would keep her safe, no matter what. Tell her we'll get him, Jack typed back. Tell her we're fighting for her and her family. He hit send and turned to Diesel. It's time. The crew mounted their bikes, the rumble of their engines filling the air. The convoy of bikers roared through the streets, making their way toward the hideout. Jack's mind was focused, his thoughts racing through every detail of the plan. They had to hit McKinsey's place hard, fast, and without hesitation. As they neared the building, Jack's heart rate quickened. The place looked like any other warehouse on the outside, But Jack knew better. This was Mackenzie's nerve center. This was where the operation was being run. They pulled up to the back of the building, parking their bikes in a tight formation. Jack signaled for the crew to stay low. "We go in quiet. No noise, no guns until we need them," Jack said, his voice steady but commanding. The bikers moved swiftly, taking up positions around the perimeter of the building. Jack and Diesel approached the back door, where Bear was already waiting, his massive frame hidden in the shadows. Bear gave them a quick nod. Doors locked, but not for long. With a few swift movements, Bear had the lock picked, and they were inside. The warehouse was dark and cold, with the smell of stale air and chemicals hanging in the air. Jack motioned for the crew to spread out. They needed to move fast before anyone could react. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, Jack could hear voices up ahead. Mackenzie's men were gathered in the back, likely discussing their next move. Jack motioned for the crew to stay low. The sound of their boots on the concrete floor was barely audible. They crept closer, each step bringing them nearer to Mackenzie and his operation. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. They were about to take down Mackenzie's entire operation. The stakes had never been higher. With a final glance at his team, Jack nodded. "On my count." The crew moved into position. Jack took a deep breath, his fingers wrapped tightly around the handle of his knife. It was time to end this. As the crew moved through the dimly lit warehouse, their boots silent on the cold concrete floor, Jack could feel the weight of the moment. This was it, the chance to end everything Mackenzie had built, to destroy the criminal empire that had been operating right under their noses. The air was thick with tension. Jack's mind raced, calculating every step, every potential move. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. He glanced over his shoulder at Diesel, who gave him a small nod. The team was ready. The plan had been set, and now it was time to execute. They were moving fast, no longer hiding in the shadows. Jack signaled the crew to spread out, covering the flanks as they closed in on the men who were gathered near the back of the warehouse. Mackenzie's guys were unaware of the approaching danger, their backs turned as they discussed the next shipment. Jack crept closer, the sound of his breathing steady despite the rush of adrenaline. It was only a matter of time before they would be within striking distance. "Now," Jack whispered into his mic. The crew burst into action. Bear and Diesel quickly neutralized two guards near the entrance, taking them down silently. Jack and Shadow moved in from the opposite side, their movements swift and precise. There was no time to waste. As they got closer, Jack could hear Mackenzie's voice, calm and authoritative, as he gave orders to his men. It sounded like he was expecting the shipment, the one they had uncovered in the warehouse. Jack's pulse quickened. This was bigger than they had thought. Mackenzie wasn't just running drugs. This was a full-scale operation, one that involved weapons, trafficking, and more. Jack felt a sense of resolve settle over him. This was the moment. "We take them out fast, but we make sure Mackenzie's alive," Jack said into his earpiece, his voice steady. "We need him for questioning." Diesel responded with a low grunt, the sound of his voice barely audible. "Got it." The crew moved in closer, Jack and Shadow flanking Mackenzie's men from either side. The air was thick with anticipation. It would only take one wrong move to alert them, but Jack knew his team. They wouldn't let him down. "We need to shut this down, now," Jack thought, the words echoing in his mind. Mackenzie had caused enough pain, enough destruction. Jack wasn't going to let him get away with it. As Jack took another step forward, a loud crash rang out, followed by the sound of Mackenzie's men shouting. They had been spotted. "Time's up," Jack muttered under his breath. He gave a quick signal to Bear, and within moments, the first wave of bikers surged forward, taking down Mackenzie's men in a flurry of controlled chaos. The shots were precise, each biker moving with a sense of purpose. They knew what needed to be done. Jack's focus was on Mackenzie, who was now scrambling to escape. He tried to make a run for it, but Jack was quicker. In a few swift steps, Jack was on him, grabbing Mackenzie by the collar and slamming him against a nearby wall. The impact was enough to knock the air out of Mackenzie's lungs. His face twisted in panic as he tried to break free, but Jack's grip was firm. "You're not going anywhere," Jack growled, his voice cold and unwavering. Mackenzie gasped for air, his eyes wide with fear. "You think you can take me down, biker?" he spat, trying to shake Jack off. Jack's gaze never wavered. "I don't think. I know." With a sharp motion, Jack shoved Mackenzie back against the wall, pinning him in place. "You've been running this whole operation, haven't you?" Jack demanded, his voice low but full of authority. Mackenzie's eyes darted around, searching for an escape that wasn't there. "You've got nothing on me," Mackenzie sneered, his voice shaky. Jack took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "You'd be surprised," he said, pulling out the evidence they had gathered from the warehouse. "We've got your files, your records, everything we need to bring you down." Mackenzie's face fell, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. "You can't just take me in," Mackenzie said, his voice rising with panic. "I've got connections. People who will make sure you never see the light of day." Jack stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "That's what you don't understand," he said, his voice dripping with cold certainty. "You're not untouchable anymore. You're done." The rest of the crew moved in, securing the perimeter and making sure no one else was left standing. Mackenzie was surrounded, his empire crumbling before his eyes. But Jack wasn't done yet. He wasn't going to let Mackenzie walk away. Not after everything he had done, not after everything he had taken. "Get him out of here," Jack ordered, nodding to Diesel. Diesel and Bear moved in, cuffing Mackenzie and lifting him off the ground. As they began to drag him away, Jack turned to the rest of the crew. "This isn't over yet," he said, his voice firm. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us. But this, right here, is a start. We've hit them hard, but there's more to do." Jack turned to look at the man they had just captured, his thoughts already racing toward the next move. They had taken Mackenzie down, but Jack knew this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The crew was still in the warehouse, the air thick with the tension of the past few hours. Jack stood beside Mackenzie, who was now sitting in a corner, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. His face was pale, and he was glaring at Jack with a mixture of anger and fear. The rest of the team was moving quickly, gathering evidence, securing the perimeter, and making sure that nothing could go wrong. Diesel walked up to Jack, a grim look on his face. "We've got a problem," Diesel said quietly, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "The cops are on their way. They're going to want answers." Jack nodded, his mind already racing. He had anticipated the police showing up eventually, but now that it was happening, he needed to figure out what to do next. The last thing they needed was for Mackenzie to use his connections to slip away from them. Jack's hand tightened into a fist. "We'll handle it. Just make sure Mackenzie stays put," he said, his voice calm but full of authority. Diesel gave him a nod, his expression serious. "I'll keep an eye on him," Diesel replied. Jack moved toward Mackenzie, his boots echoing in the silence of the warehouse. He knelt down in front of the man, his eyes cold. "You've got a lot to answer for," Jack said, his voice low but firm. Mackenzie scoffed, trying to break free from the restraints, but it was clear he knew he wasn't going anywhere. "You think you've won, don't you?" Mackenzie sneered. "You think you can take me down like this, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. I've got connections everywhere, people who will make sure you never see the light of day." Jack's expression didn't change. "You're already done," he said. "We've got everything we need to make sure you'll never hurt anyone again." Mackenzie's face twisted in anger. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You have no idea who I know, what I've got on you. You won't be able to hide from what's coming." Jack stood up, his eyes locked on Mackenzie's. "I'm not hiding from anything. You're going away for a long time, and we're taking your whole operation down." Just then, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The police were almost there. Jack knew that they didn't have much time. He turned to Diesel. "Get ready. We need to move quickly," he ordered. Diesel nodded and walked off to make sure the rest of the crew was in position. Jack turned back to Mackenzie. "You can't stop this. You've been exposed, and it's over for you." Mackenzie laughed, but there was a hint of desperation in his voice. "You really think I'm going down like this? You think the cops will do anything? They'll be on my side in no time." Jack shook his head. "Not this time. You've crossed too many lines, Mackenzie. This is bigger than you, and we've already won." The sound of footsteps echoed from behind, and the door to the warehouse creaked open. The first officer stepped inside, a tall man with a stern expression, followed by a few others. The moment the officer saw Mackenzie sitting on the floor, his hands cuffed, he raised an eyebrow. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Jack stepped forward. "We've got a criminal syndicate operating right here under our noses. Mackenzie is the head of it. We've got all the evidence you need to bring him down. It's time to finish this. The officer looked from Jack to Mackenzie, then back again. All right, let's see what we've got. Jack could feel the tension in the air as the police began to process the scene. They started taking notes, looking through the evidence the bikers had gathered. It was clear to Jack that the police had no idea how deep this operation ran, but they were now taking it seriously. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from Aisha. Asterisk, Maya's asking when she can see her dad again. I don't know how to answer her. Asterisk, Jack paused for a moment, his heart sinking. He hadn't been able to tell Maya the truth. Her father was a hero to her, and now she had to know that he wasn't coming back. Jack typed a quick response. Asterisk, we'll handle everything. We're keeping her safe. She doesn't need to know the whole truth just yet. Asterisk, he sent the message and stuffed the phone back into his pocket, turning his attention back to Mackenzie, who was still glaring at him. You can't protect her forever, Mackenzie spat. She's just a little girl. You think you can hide her from this world? Jack's gaze hardened. I'll do whatever it takes to protect her, and I'm not going to let you hurt anyone else. Your empire ends now. The officers continued their work, and within an hour, Mackenzie was loaded into a police car, his face still twisted in defiance. As the vehicle pulled away, Jack watched, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over him. It was over. They had taken Mackenzie down, but Jack knew this was just the first victory. There was more work to be done. The operation they had uncovered was just a fraction of what Mackenzie's syndicate had been involved in. But for now, Jack allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He had kept his promise to Maya's father. She was safe, and no matter what came next, Jack knew he would fight to protect her with everything he had. The days following Mackenzie's arrest were a mix of relief and tension. The warehouse operation had been dismantled, but Jack knew that the syndicate was far from over. Mackenzie may have been the head of it, but there were others, smarter, more dangerous people still pulling the strings. Jack spent the next few days gathering more intel, following up on leads, and making sure that no stone was left unturned. The bikers kept watch over Maya, ensuring that she was safe, while everything else unfolded around them. Despite the victories they had already secured, Jack could feel a storm brewing in the distance. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Jack sat in his office, staring at the map of the city that was now covered in red marks and pins. Each one represented a lead, a place where they had to dig deeper, a target they had to neutralize. It was overwhelming, but Jack knew it was necessary. His phone buzzed on the desk, and Jack picked it up, seeing a message from Diesel. Asterisk, we've got a problem. Someone's trying to move Mackenzie out of jail. They're making their move tonight. Asterisk, Jack's stomach tightened. He had known this day would come. The attempt to free Mackenzie. It was happening sooner than he thought. Without wasting another second, Jack gathered his things and headed for the door. Diesel had already assembled the crew, and they were ready to act. The plan was clear. Stop Mackenzie's allies from getting to him, and make sure Mackenzie stayed behind bars, where he belonged. They couldn't afford any more slip-ups. The crew met up at the designated location, a warehouse on the outskirts of town, where they believed Mackenzie's associates were planning the jailbreak. Jack and Diesel stood at the forefront, with Bear and Shadow flanking them. The rest of the crew was strategically positioned around the perimeter, their bikes hidden in the shadows, ready for action. All right, we know the drill, Jack said, his voice steady as he addressed the team. We stop them before they get Mackenzie out. No mistakes, no mercy. Diesel nodded. Let's move. The crew moved like a well-oiled machine, their actions swift and coordinated. They crept through the dark streets, their bikes' engines silent as they approached the warehouse. The moonlight cast an eerie glow over the building, but Jack wasn't fooled by the quiet. This was the calm before the storm. They reached the back of the warehouse, where they could see two men standing guard near a side door. Jack signaled to Diesel, and the two of them moved in, their footsteps soundless against the pavement. With one swift motion, Diesel took down the first guard, while Jack dealt with the second. The two men didn't even have a chance to react. They were both unconscious before they hit the ground. We're in, Jack whispered into his mic. Proceed to the main entrance. The rest of the crew followed suit, infiltrating the warehouse without alerting the rest of the men inside. As they moved deeper into the building, the sound of muffled voices reached their ears. Jack signaled for everyone to stop. They were close. He could feel the tension in the air. Take them down fast, but don't kill anyone unless you have to, Jack ordered, his voice cold and controlled. They moved in, splitting into smaller groups to surround the men inside. Jack's eyes narrowed as he spotted the leader of the group, a man who was clearly in charge. He was pacing near a desk, speaking into a phone. Mackenzie's allies, Jack thought, his jaw tightening. They were trying to coordinate Mackenzie's escape, and Jack was determined to make sure it didn't happen. Jack and Diesel moved in on the leader, who was still unaware of their presence. With a swift motion, Jack knocked the phone from his hand and grabbed him by the collar, slamming him into the nearby wall. "Where is Mackenzie?" Jack demanded, his voice low and threatening. The man's eyes widened in shock, and he stammered, trying to break free. "I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about." Jack pressed harder, his grip tightening. "I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm asking where Mackenzie is." The man's eyes darted around the room, and Jack could see the fear in them. "He's in the back, in the holding room," the man finally admitted, his voice shaking. Jack didn't waste a second. He pushed the man aside and signaled for the crew to move forward. They quickly made their way to the back of the warehouse, where they found another group of men preparing to move Mackenzie out. The situation was escalating fast, but Jack wasn't about to let them get away. He gave the order, and the bikers stormed in. The sound of the confrontation was deafening, but Jack's focus was unwavering. The men in the back had no idea what hit them. They were quickly overpowered, subdued by the bikers' swift and controlled moves. Mackenzie was still sitting in the corner, his eyes wide with disbelief. Jack moved toward him, grabbing him by the arm and pulling him to his feet. "You really thought you were going to get out, didn't you?" Jack said, his voice laced with disdain. Mackenzie tried to break free, but Jack held him firm. "You're not going anywhere. Not this time." The police arrived just as Jack was about to leave the warehouse, the sirens filling the air. They had managed to stop Mackenzie's escape, but Jack knew the fight wasn't over. Mackenzie's empire was vast, and there were still others out there who would stop at nothing to free him. As the officers took Mackenzie into custody once again, Jack turned to his crew. "This isn't over. We've got more work to do. But for now, we've won." Diesel nodded, his face hard as stone. One step closer. Jack looked out into the night, his mind already on the next move. They had stopped one threat, but there were many more waiting in the shadows. And Jack would be ready for them, no matter what. The days that followed Mackenzie's second arrest were quieter, but the unease never quite left Jack. Every morning, he woke up with a sense of purpose, knowing the work wasn't finished, but also with a nagging feeling that the storm hadn't fully passed. They had stopped one criminal mastermind, but Mackenzie was just the tip of the iceberg. Jack sat in his bike shop late one night, looking over the files, pictures, and evidence they had gathered. The operation they had uncovered was vast, stretching across multiple states, with deeper connections in law enforcement and politics than Jack had imagined. He thought of Maya, who was safe for now, but still vulnerable. Her father had died, and her life had been torn apart. Jack couldn't afford to let her down. As Jack sipped his coffee, the door to the shop opened, and Diesel walked in, a grim look on his face. "We've got intel," Diesel said, walking toward Jack. "It's not over." Jack stood up immediately, his expression hardening. "What do you mean?" "Mackenzie's in custody. We've got him." Diesel shook his head. "Mackenzie's out of the picture for now, but there's someone else pulling the strings. Someone much higher up than we thought." Jack's stomach dropped. He had suspected this for a while. Mackenzie had been a small piece in a much larger puzzle. "Who is it?" Jack asked, his voice tight with urgency. Diesel handed Jack a folder, and as Jack flipped it open, his heart sank. The name on the first page was one Jack knew all too well, Senator Ronald Westbrook. The man was a pillar of the local community, always involved in charitable causes, always making the right political moves. But Jack knew better. He'd seen the kind of people who operated behind the scenes, pulling strings in the shadows, and Westbrook was one of them. "Westbrook," Jack muttered. "How is he involved?" Diesel leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. "He's been the one funding Mackenzie's operations. Not just the ones here, but all over the state. And now it looks like he's planning to take everything international." Jack's mind raced. Westbrook had always been seen as a respected figure, someone the public trusted. If Jack went after him, he would be putting a target on his back, and the entire crew would be at risk. But Jack wasn't afraid of targets. "What's our next move?" Jack asked, setting the folder down. Diesel took a deep breath. We need to take Westbrook down before he can do any more damage. The problem is, we can't just go in guns blazing. He's too well protected, and any wrong move could blow everything we've worked for. Jack nodded. He understood the stakes. If they went after Westbrook, they needed to do it carefully. They couldn't afford to get sloppy now. We'll do it quietly, Jack said, his voice steady. We get the proof we need, and then we expose him. Diesel nodded. I've already got eyes on him. I'm working on getting us into his inner circle. We'll have to be patient, but I'm confident we can pull it off. Jack felt the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about protecting Maya anymore. This was about taking down an entire network of corruption that had been operating for years, all while keeping the crew safe. It wasn't going to be easy, but Jack was used to hard fights. As the days passed, the crew went into overdrive, gathering information on Senator Westbrook and his associates. Diesel worked the connections, getting into places Jack couldn't, while the rest of the bikers kept watch over the streets, making sure there was no one watching them. They had to be careful. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Jack spent his nights poring over files, trying to connect the dots between Westbrook's political donations and the illicit activities McKinsey had been involved in. As they got closer to the truth, Jack felt the pressure building. He knew they were running out of time. Westbrook wouldn't sit idle for long. One evening, as the sun set and the city's skyline bathed in orange light, Jack received a call from Diesel. We've got a meeting, Diesel said, his voice tense. Westbrook's people want to talk. They're offering a sit-down. Jack's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. The opportunity to confront Westbrook head-on. But Jack wasn't about to fall for a trap. Set it up, Jack said, his voice calm but determined. But we're not going in blind. I want backup ready. Diesel agreed, and the plan was set. They would meet Westbrook's representatives in a secluded location, a safe distance from prying eyes. But even as Jack prepared for the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the crew gathered, Jack gave them a quick briefing. We don't know if this is a trap, but we need to play it smart. We go in, we get what we need, and we get out. No heroics. The crew nodded, their expressions hardening with resolve. This was the moment they had been working toward, but Jack knew it wouldn't be easy. Westbrook was a powerful man, and the people behind him were just as dangerous. They couldn't afford to underestimate them. As they prepared to leave, Jack turned to Diesel. Stay close. We're not letting him walk away this time. Diesel nodded, his jaw set in determination. We won't. As the crew revved their bikes and headed toward the meeting location, Jack's thoughts returned to Maya. He had made a promise to her, and he would keep it. No matter what it took, he would protect her. Tonight, they were going after the biggest threat yet, and nothing was going to stop them from taking down Westbrook and his entire operation. The meeting place was a rundown warehouse on the edge of town, a location that reeked of secrecy, the kind of place that made you feel like you were walking into a trap before you even stepped foot inside. Jack sat on his bike, his eyes scanning the surroundings, taking in every detail. The rest of the crew stood nearby, positioned strategically, ready to move at a moment's notice. Diesel, standing just a few feet away, caught Jack's eye. The message was clear: be ready for anything. The plan was simple: meet Westbrook's representatives, get what they needed, and leave. But there was always that nagging feeling in the back of Jack's mind, the one that whispered this could be the moment everything unraveled. They'd been working in the shadows for days, digging into Westbrook's operation, gathering intel, and preparing for this confrontation. It was time to confront the man who had been pulling the strings, but Jack knew better than to underestimate someone like him. Westbrook was powerful, his influence ran deep, and he had connections that went all the way to the top. This wasn't just about stopping a criminal syndicate anymore. This was about taking down a man who had been hiding in plain sight, using his political power as a shield. The crew was ready, and Jack's mind was sharp. He had made promises to Maya's father, promises to her, and he wasn't about to break them. No matter what happened, he was going to keep her safe. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot, the engine purring as it came to a slow stop in front of the warehouse. Two men stepped out, dressed in dark suits, their faces stoic. They didn't look like the kind of men who were used to dealing with problems. They looked like the kind of men who created problems. Jack stepped forward, his boots echoing on the gravel as he moved toward them. Diesel was close behind, his eyes scanning the men for any sign of threat. The two men didn't move when Jack reached them. They just stood there, arms crossed, watching him. The taller of the two, a man with a sharp jawline and cold eyes, spoke first. "You're Jack, I presume," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge to it. Jack didn't flinch. "That's right. And you are?" The man's lips twitched into something that resembled a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We represent Senator Ronald Westbrook. He's been expecting you." Jack nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Let's get to it then." The two men motioned for Jack and Diesel to follow them into the warehouse. As they walked inside, the air grew colder, and the sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty space. The warehouse was dimly lit, with just a few scattered lights hanging from the ceiling. At the far end of the room, a man sat at a desk, his back turned to them. He looked up as they approached, his face smooth and composed. It was Senator Westbrook himself. Jack felt a wave of disgust wash over him. The man had a way of making you feel like everything he did was justified, like the world owed him something. He'd hidden behind his public image for years, using his political power to manipulate and control, but now the mask was slipping. This wasn't the same man who smiled for cameras and gave speeches at rallies. This was the real Westbrook, the man who had been orchestrating everything from the shadows. "Mr. Jack," Westbrook said, his voice smooth, like he was speaking to an old acquaintance. "It's good to finally meet you." Jack didn't sit. He stood tall, his eyes locked onto Westbrook's. "I'm not here for pleasantries," Jack said, his voice firm. "We both know why I'm here." Westbrook didn't flinch. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please, take a seat. I think we should talk about the future." Jack didn't move. "The future," he repeated. "Your future's already decided. You're done." Westbrook chuckled softly, almost like he was humoring a child. "You really think that? You've made quite the mess of things, Jack. But do you know how much more power I have than you? How many people you're up against?" Jack took a step closer, his face inches from Westbrook's. "I don't care about your power. You've hurt enough people. You're going to pay for that." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their words hanging between them. Westbrook finally leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're brave, I'll give you that. But you're in over your head. I'm untouchable. The people I know, the people who protect me, they'll make sure nothing happens to me. Not even you and your crew can stop that." Jack didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had heard enough. He turned toward Diesel, signaling him to move. Diesel stepped forward, his voice cold as he spoke to Westbrook's men. "It's over. You've been exposed. We've got everything on you." Westbrook's smile faded as Diesel handed him a folder. Westbrook glanced down at the papers, his face going pale. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They had him. The evidence was irrefutable. Jack could see the panic in Westbrook's eyes, the mask of control slipping away. "You think you can just walk out of here?" Jack asked, his voice cold and unwavering. Westbrook opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He was trapped, and he knew it. "You're finished," Jack said, turning toward the door. As the crew moved to escort Westbrook and his men out of the building, Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The job wasn't done yet. They still had work to do, but this was a significant step. They had taken down one of the most powerful men in the city. It was a victory, but the war wasn't over. Jack couldn't help but think of Maya and the promise he had made to keep her safe. Tonight, they had won. But Jack knew they couldn't stop now. There was still more to do. The days after Senator Westbrook's arrest passed in a blur. Jack and his crew continued to sweep through the network they had exposed, dismantling parts of Mackenzie's operation one by one. But Jack's mind kept circling back to one thing, Maya. She had become his priority, his responsibility, the reason he fought so hard to tear down the empire of corruption and violence. She needed stability, she needed safety, and Jack was determined to provide that, no matter the cost. Every time Jack saw her, she was a little less frightened, a little more at ease. But he knew that it wasn't over yet. He had promised her father he would protect her, and that promise weighed heavily on him. As Jack sat in his bike shop, the files spread across the table in front of him. Diesel walked in with a serious look on his face. "We've got more trouble," Diesel said, his voice low. "What now?" Jack asked, his eyes scanning Diesel's face. Diesel handed Jack a file, his gaze hard. "There's another player in this. Someone connected to Westbrook, but even further up the chain. I'm talking about a bigger name." Jack's heart sank. He had thought they were done with this, but now it seemed like the battle was far from over. Who? Jack asked, taking the file from Diesel. Diesel paused, glancing at the file in Jack's hands. Governor Lisa Caldwell. Jack's mind raced. The governor? It made sense in a way. A politician with that much power and influence wouldn't sit idly by while her connections were exposed. She had a reputation for being untouchable, and her ties to Westbrook were now undeniable. She's been pulling strings from the shadows for a long time, Diesel continued. We've got her name on several of McKinsey's financial transactions. She's been funneling money to his operation. And now, it looks like she's trying to cover her tracks. Jack's jaw clenched. So, this doesn't end with Westbrook. It goes all the way to the top. Diesel nodded. Exactly. And we can't afford to let her slip through our fingers. If she's involved in this, it's only going to get worse. Jack stood up, his mind already working through the next steps. The stakes had just gotten higher. They couldn't let Caldwell continue to operate unchecked. They needed to bring her down before she could do any more damage. We need to move fast, Jack said, his voice resolute. Get the crew together. We're going after her. Diesel nodded. I'll get the intel we need. We'll track her down, find out where she's hiding. As the crew gathered, Jack felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. This wasn't just about protecting Maya anymore. It was about taking down the entire network of corruption that had been controlling their city, ruining lives, and destroying families. Jack knew the risks. Taking down Caldwell meant going after one of the most powerful people in the state. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be clean. But Jack wasn't afraid of taking risks. He had made promises, and he intended to keep them. The crew split into two groups, each tasked with gathering intel and monitoring Caldwell's movements. Jack and Diesel worked the phones, calling in favors and tracking down any information they could get their hands on. Hours passed, and the tension in the air grew thicker. Finally, Diesel came through with the information they needed. I've got her, he said, holding up his phone. Caldwell's staying at a private estate outside the city. She's meeting with some of Mackenzie's old associates. Jack felt a surge of determination. We move in tonight. Get everyone ready. The crew assembled quickly, their bikes lined up outside the shop, engines rumbling in the cool night air. Jack could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it. This was the final step. They were going after Caldwell, and they weren't going to stop until she was brought to justice. The ride to the estate was quiet, the sound of the engines filling the night as they sped through the streets. Jack's mind was focused. He wasn't thinking about anything else, only Caldwell, only the mission. As they reached the outskirts of the estate, Jack signaled for the crew to slow down. They needed to move in quietly. The estate was massive, surrounded by tall iron gates and security cameras. It wasn't going to be easy to get inside, but Jack wasn't worried. He had been in situations like this before. They would find a way. We're going to split up, Jack whispered, his voice steady. Diesel, you and Bear take the east side. Shadow, you and Colossus cover the west. The rest of you with me. We're going through the front. The crew moved into position, their actions swift and efficient. The estate was quiet, the only sound coming from the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Jack could feel the tension building as they approached the front of the house. On my signal, Jack said, his voice low. We go in fast. He held his breath for a moment, then gave the signal. The crew moved in like a wave, their boots pounding against the gravel driveway. They reached the front door in seconds, and Jack kicked it open with force. The element of surprise was on their side. Caldwell's associates barely had time to react as the bikers stormed into the house. Jack was in front, his eyes scanning the room. He saw Caldwell standing near the back, her face twisted in panic. You're not getting away, Jack said, his voice cold and determined. Caldwell's eyes flicked to the door, then back to Jack. You think you can just walk in here and take me down? You have no idea who I am, she said, her voice trembling. Jack stepped closer. I know exactly who you are. You're a criminal, and you're going to pay for what you've done. Caldwell's face darkened, but she didn't move. Jack's crew surrounded her, ensuring she couldn't escape. This was the end of the line for her. The charges against her were already stacked high, and there was no way out. As they moved to take Caldwell into custody, Jack felt a sense of finality. They had done it. The operation was over. The fight for Maya's safety was complete. But as Jack looked around at his crew, he knew this wasn't just about one victory. This was about making sure that no one like Caldwell could ever rise to power again. And with that, the mission was over. They had won. As the dust settled and the final pieces of the operation came together, Jack stood in the quiet aftermath, his eyes scanning the streets outside the safe house, where Caldwell was now under police guard. The victory was hard-earned, but it was a victory nonetheless. The criminal network had been exposed, their key players arrested, and the city was finally starting to feel like it was free from the grasp of corruption that had threatened to swallow it whole. But Jack knew that freedom came at a cost. His hands, once bloodied in battle, now rested on the cold surface of the desk in front of him. He had made promises to Maya's father, promises to Maya herself, and as much as he wanted to take a moment to breathe, he couldn't. The weight of those promises still hung heavy. Maya had been through enough, and Jack had become the shield she needed. But he wasn't sure what the future would hold for her. She had been through the ringer, and the scars ran deeper than anyone knew. As he sat there, the door to the room creaked open, and Diesel stepped inside. His face was tired, but there was a glimmer of relief in his eyes. "It's over, Jack," Diesel said, his voice soft. Jack nodded, his eyes still fixed on the table. "Yeah, for now." Diesel walked over to the desk and placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "You did it. You kept your word." Jack let out a heavy breath. "We did it. But I'm not sure the city will ever be the same." Diesel smirked. "Probably not. But at least it's a step in the right direction." Jack's gaze turned to the window, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. The city, once filled with shadows, was beginning to shine again. But as much as he wanted to believe that everything would be okay, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. He had won this fight, but the war would never truly end. He glanced back at Diesel, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "We've made a dent, but there's more to do. We need to make sure no one like Westbrook or McKinsey ever rises to power again. We can't stop now." Diesel gave him a knowing nod. "You're not the type to stop, Jack. We've got your back. Always." Jack stood up from the desk, his shoulders straight, the weight of the world on his back, but a sense of pride within him. He had done what needed to be done. He had protected those who couldn't protect themselves, and that, at the end of the day, was all that mattered. The crew had stayed loyal, and in the end, it was that loyalty that had helped them take down the system of corruption. They had taken out the key players, Westbrook, McKinsey, and now Caldwell. The cycle had been broken, but Jack knew better than to think it was truly over. There would always be another fight, another battle to face. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of relief. They had done what most people couldn't or wouldn't do. They had made a difference. As Jack walked out of the room, Diesel followed him, and they both walked into the night. The rest of the crew was already outside, preparing for the ride. The sound of the engines revving filled the air as Jack mounted his bike, Diesel taking his place beside him. The wind blew through their hair as they rode down the empty streets, their bikes slicing through the silence of the night. Jack's thoughts drifted to Maya. She was safe for now, but the world would always be a dangerous place. He had made a promise to her, and he would do whatever it took to make sure that promise wasn't broken. As the crew rode together into the horizon, Jack knew one thing for sure. He would never stop fighting for what was right. And with his crew by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. The battle for justice was far from over, but for tonight, they had won.